Okay, thank you everyone for joining today. Good morning to Austria and good afternoon to everyone who is joining from Australia. Great to have you with us. My name is Matthias Mikolai and I'm the Market Officer for the Infrastructure and Energy sector in at the Austrian Trade Commission in Australia, and I will be guiding you through today's webinar. Before we get started, let me mention a few house rules. After my brief introduction, I will hand over to Said Hirsch from Infrastructure New South Wales and to James Smithers from BDO's Project and Infrastructure Advisory, followed by a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time in the Q&A section. We can also open later on your microphone to turn this into more of a discussion. The webinar is being recorded and we will send the record to you in the next few days. Before I hand over to our speakers, I'd like to note that we ran a similar webinar last December about Queensland and its preparations for the 2032 Olympic Games, including infrastructure projects that come along with that. Today's sessions, though, will give you a high-level overview on the infrastructure developments in New South Wales. Both states currently have by far the highest infrastructure budget, which is why we are focusing on those. Both webinars are in preparation of an Austrian company delegation in the field of infrastructure in late November this year, offering you a chance to explore the projects more in depth and connect directly with local stakeholders. We will send out invitations to register for this delegation next week, and we welcome each of you to engage with us and discussing the agenda. New South Wales has the largest economy among the Australian states, driven by financial and professional services, technology, manufacturing, education, health and infrastructure, and consistently contributing around 1/3 of Australia's total GDP. It hosts a high concentration of global and Asia-Pacific regional headquarters, making it the primary gateway for international capital, investment and trade into Australia. With that in mind, I'm very pleased to introduce you our first speaker today, Said Hirsch. Said is head of the Strategy, Planning and Innovation team at Infrastructure New South Wales, and he will give us an overview about his organization and the rail and road sector. Said, thank you very much for joining us today, and over to you.
Thanks, Nikolai. I'll just see if I can share my screen well.
Yep. Yep, we can see your screen.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Perfect.
First of all, we look forward to getting your delegation over. It's great when we have a lot of international delegations coming. A lot more exciting than the COVID days when we were all locked away from seeing each other. So it still feels exciting every time we speak to international delegations. So I'll just start by saying what Infrastructure New South Wales. I start here by acknowledging while I'm on Gadigal land and pay our respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. And then I'll get into what we do at Infrastructure New South Wales. So maybe just we're not as exciting at the moment as Queensland with the Olympics coming up, but there's something unique that every state agency every state in Australia has an infrastructure body. We all do different things in a way, and I think the exception is Queensland doesn't have an infrastructure body anymore, and it's dealt with within the government department rather than a separate infrastructure body. And they all do quite separate things, but fundamentally in New South Wales we are set up by law so that we have our legislation as an independent government agency with a separate board, which has a board of private sector and public sector representatives. And the way the organization is functioned is a strategy division, which is what I lead, which effectively provides the expert advice on infrastructure projects through a state infrastructure strategy, which looks 20 years ahead, and an annual state infrastructure plan, which looks at the pipeline that is budgeted for within the state budget, which we do every year. And then we provide coordination function, which is we have something in the legislation called the Coordinator General for Infrastructure, which effectively brings different infrastructure sectors together, say water, transport, energy, or whatever, around a certain government objective, usually spatial, like the Aerotropolis, which we're building, or the delivery of the energy, the renewable energy infrastructure. And then we do what other policy areas they ask us to do. So at the moment, we're looking very deeply at data centers as an example, and the provision of infrastructure and to support the development of data centers. So that's kind of the division that I lead. Then we have an investor assurance function, which is fundamentally, I don't know if you're aware of gateway reviews, but what that is really is just all the major projects, anything above $50 million, has the team here at Investor Assurance provide government with assurance around the timely delivery of projects, the costs, and warns of any risks coming up on projects that government should be aware of and take action on. And then we have a unique kind of division that doesn't exist in other infrastructure bodies, because we have an act within our legislation and ability to deliver projects. So we deliver within that division the projects that, major projects that government agencies cannot deliver. So, for example, museums, stadiums, where there is no kind of natural home for it in government, but it's a significantly large project. So we don't deliver, say, metros or transport, because there's obviously a competent agency to do that. And then there are corporate services that support us. So I talked about these things, but I just touch on some of this stuff because it is a major government priority here, which is we're delivering a very large site, around 11,000 hectares in Western Sydney, where an airport has actually been built and will be operational by the end of the year. So that's the second airport in Sydney, or Western Sydney International Airport. So that's been delivered, and we're delivering the first metro line out of that airport, which will be operational next year. And there is circa $29 billion worth of government investment in that area to unlock mainly quite a lot of industrial lands, some of which have been built out. So a lot of kind of freight logistics, manufacturing, a lot of data centers locating there, and building a whole new city called Bradfield, close proximity to the airport. So that's probably where significant investment, both infrastructure, but also quite a lot of private sector investment is happening in New South Wales. So there's, I think, over $30 billion of private investment that's happened or happening in the area there. Another big priority of government here is obviously housing. So no surprises probably there. Everyone in similar jurisdictions is struggling with housing supply and so on. But our role there is to coordinate whether it's water infrastructure, transport, and others around areas which have been zoned for housing. And there's a lot of activity in that area, and there's targets around how many houses need to be delivered. The biggest probably deal happening, I touch a lot, you'll hear me a lot. The biggest projects are usually transport, but probably the biggest growth areas in New South Wales specifically, and probably a lot in Australia, are water infrastructure and energy infrastructure. So we're undergoing, like many other places around the world, a large transition away from coal-fired power stations into renewable generation. So we have a policy around renewable energy zones in New South Wales, which are very large zones. And I lived in Europe most of my life. So it's when you come into Australia, when you say a renewable energy zone, it is literally some of them are the size of some European countries. So they're very, very large areas. And they were obviously chosen because of the wind and solar power they can generate. But there are significant assets that need to be built around them. So obviously there's transmission lines, so that these areas are not traditionally connected in the way you would need them to the actual grid system. That's one thing. So there's a very large grid or transmission infrastructure being built out, apart from the solar farms and the wind farms. But also, most of them sit pretty far from the port. So the first big zone, the Central West Orana, is about 500 kilometers from the main port. So we are building a lot of road infrastructure and port infrastructure to enable to allow for the movements of oversized assets, big wind turbines and so on, to get them to the renewable energy zone. So it's a pretty large undertaking, and it will obviously take years. There's a lot of work there. And I mentioned data centers before. It popped up about probably just under a year ago, where there's a kind of a rapid, massive growth in demand for data centers. There was kind of a concern about, like everywhere else, energy and water resources needed to support them. And we have been doing quite a lot of work in that area. And I'm happy in the questions to answer about where we're at with all of these things. And then if I talked a bit about the key things that are happening, but broadly, I think it's good to just look at least our most recent budget. We'll have a new budget next month, but roughly the state spends circa $28 billion a year on infrastructure. It's been rising, obviously, and probably will not change a huge amount in this coming budget. I can't predict what it will be. We'll have to wait like everyone else. But it'd be about $30 billion of spend, or just under that. Traditionally, we've had transport, and I think if you think about the past kind of 10 to 15 years, there was a round of large asset sales in New South Wales. So the state sold a lot of its stakes in things like electricity and those kinds of assets, and used a lot of these proceeds to invest in especially transport infrastructure. So we have two metro lines were built in the process. We have 2 other metro lines being built at the moment. So those would have been circa $70 billion of the past 10 years, and some more happening still on the 2 lines being built. A large motorway system was built, tunneled motorway, the West connects, North connects before that. A lot of schools, hospitals, and things were built, but fundamentally we were about 70-80% of the last 10 years would have been large transport infrastructure. And there is still two major metro lines being built. So a lot of the historically, a lot of the spend has been in transport. Going forward, while the spend is very high, and there's still 2 very large metro projects in delivery, which take up a large chunk of our spending. Our pipeline is changing. We publish, so you can go to our website, Infrastructure New South Wales. We publish our major infrastructure pipeline, which is all the projects over $50 million that have been either in the planning, so they've been approved for planning, or they're coming up for procurement. So you wouldn't see the ones that are already in delivery. Or delivered, but you will see all the ones that are coming up for government procurement. So government's trying to buy, obviously, construction services there. So what you will see from there is probably a lot less transport than it's been in the past, and a lot of other sectors popping up. We started also publishing an asset management pipeline, which is still very thin, and there'll be more of these asset management packages coming up. Now, going forward, as I said, we've gone from a pipeline of transport of about over 70% to roughly 57%. So it's dropped in share. It's still the largest, obviously, by value, but it has definitely dropped in share. We have increased significantly the schools spend. So there's a lot of education spend, and there's a large school building program, and it has been for a while, but it's expanded more. There was a number before about social housing. So social housing traditionally in the past in New South Wales was a kind of a self-funded type arrangement where you effectively had to sell assets to build assets. So there was a very low growth, if no growth, in social houses, despite the very high demand. So this new government, well, not new anymore, but the government that came in 2023 put in over $5 billion into the social housing pipeline. So it's committed capital towards that. So that's been a very large investment that has not historically happened. But I'd go to what we don't show here is energy projects. So these are the projects that we show here are the ones that are actually directly funded by the state, or those that are in the water sector also funded by the state. But there's two things. We have Sydney Water is our state-owned corporation that provides obviously the water services within the Greater Sydney region. And traditionally, that entity spent circa $900 million to $1 billion a year. But the new, and it's a state-owned corporation, but regulated by an independent regulator. And the most recent determination or price determination gave it just nearly $3 billion a year in spend. So we have had a trebling for the coming 5 years until 2029-30 in the water infrastructure spend. So we have a large water infrastructure program, even though it doesn't sit directly in the state budget. It's a state-owned corporation, and I suspect that with demands on housing growth and so on, and on data centers and things, that will be growing. So that's a big growth sector. And the energy that doesn't show there is significant spend in the energy sector, both in the generation, transmission space, and projects that go across, obviously some that have been funded through the federal government as well. So that's kind of the pipeline. How do we interact with industry? So within Infrastructure New South Wales, we have a group called the Construction Leadership Group, which brings all of our state agencies and Sydney Water as a state-owned corporation, and Energy Co, which manages the energy transition, into one forum where we kind of coordinate government procurement policy in relation to construction. And we also is the primary vehicle to engage with the external industry. So all the kind of contractors, supply chain more broadly, engineers, etc., engage through that process. And then it is also the vehicle we use to progress a lot of our policy areas. So for example, we've got a decarbonization policy, so decarbonizing the delivery of infrastructure. We have policies around digitalization of the way we plan, deliver, procure, and deliver infrastructure, data kind of alignments, and so on. We have various other policies like increasing the proportion of women in the construction industry, and we have a program to do that. And there are various other things that we coordinate when. So, for example, now we, like everywhere else with the events in the Middle East, we have fuel security issues. So we coordinate the construction industry issues in relation to that and how government will respond. We coordinate things in the past, which fortunately we hadn't had to do for a year or so, but things around disaster resilience, when how the infrastructure agencies respond to any bushfires or floods and so on. So that's kind of the group does a lot of those activities. And we have kind of policies. So these are, we have something called the principles of partnership. So this tells you a bit about what the government's priorities are for our sector. So very, very big on obviously building up the domestic manufacturing space, a lot of it meaning the kind of industry around the modern methods of construction. There's a very heavy aspect for safety in the construction industry here. So within that group I just mentioned, we have Safe Work New South Wales, which is the regulator of safety across many things, but also on construction sites. There's a lot of productivity skills initiatives given the kind of low productivity in our sector. and the sector is constantly stressed financially. So the sustainability of that sector going forward is always a key concern for government. And I kind of talked about decarbonization before. The way you work with New South Wales government, it's obviously pretty transparent in relation to open tendering processes and having a record of that. So it's a good way, I guess, for new entrants to understand all the contracts that are being let. So the contracts awarded go up on those websites, the buy.New South Wales. You can see what kind of suppliers, if you need partnership opportunities, and these things are obviously trading heavily with government. And then you can obviously get, once qualified into the procurement system, you can submit obviously competitive tenders and participate that way. And I think I'm happy to leave it there. I think my 20 minutes are up, and I'll take questions when you want me to.
Thank you very much, Said, for that great presentation. As you already mentioned, we will answer any questions later in the Q&A session. I would now like to introduce you to James Smithers, partner at BDO's Project and Infrastructure Advisory here in Sydney. James will give us an overview about the state's renewable energy zones that Said already touched on a little bit, including data centers and what infrastructure, just more in detail. Yeah, James, thank you very much for joining us today, and over to you. You're still unmuted, I think.
There we go. Thank you very much, Matthias. And thank you very much, Syed. That was great to hear. All about infrastructure in New South Wales and the investment opportunities. And maybe before I go too far, I'll just do a bit of an introduction just around BDO and myself. So, as Matthias mentioned, I lead the project and infrastructure advisory team in New South Wales as a partner here in BDO. And BDO are a international professional services firm, if you don't know of us, very strong in the tax and audit space, and have grown out of an advisory practice over the last 10 to 15 years. And so we are one component of that advisory arm, focusing on projects and in particularly within infrastructure. So I will just jump into things. So now there's, I guess, highlighting there. I'll be focusing on these four areas around energy, water infrastructure, social infrastructure, and data centres. And Syed gave a nice introduction in some of those spaces in the broader context of New South Wales government. But I mean, one thing I just wanted to reiterate was what Syed said is just around the scale of investment here in New South Wales, and even in Matthias's introduction, it is a very large proportion of the national budget and scale of investment. It's also you could see on the chart that Syed showed the continuity. It's not just a single budget cycle; it's actually a multi-year pipeline. Look historically and going forward. And so, yeah, and it is. It's also very, very visible, that pipeline, as you saw, so that you could, really get a good understanding of where those opportunities may be. Just note that the key drivers around these four infrastructure areas, that there's a strong focus in New South Wales on that decarbonisation and the energy transition. Housing has been a challenge in terms of the level of growth. It's just sort of driving the supply to meet that demand growth that we're seeing. Also a strong focus broadly across the infrastructure sectors in some aging assets that really need renewal and investment. And yeah, in terms of that housing linked to population growth in the Western Sydney story, so you talked about the Western Sydney metropolis and the airport out there as well. So I'll keep moving. Just jumping into that renewable transition in the energy sector, and highlighting what again, so I had mentioned in terms of the renewable energy zones, you can see here on the map, there they are across New South Wales. They're actually they're incredibly large areas, yeah, there's considerable opportunity there. The intention is to drive around $32 billion in private sector investment, both in the sort of renewable energy storage projects and so on. In addition to that, again, the transmission lines that are there are some under construction now and some still to come, but there's a considerable investment in that space. The entity that is managing these renewable energy zones is a government body called Energy Co. Yeah, there's also just for context in terms of finding out more details around what is actually currently underway in those zones, and also just recognizing there's a body called the Energy Security Corporation that does co-invest in some of the storage, which can be an interesting body to understand as well. I'd also just mention that the way that some of the renewable energy zones are being also there's some of the infrastructure being delivered is around large consortiums with quite a few different firms. So that sort of there's opportunity. And I'll get to that a little later around sort of potentially for the right businesses teaming up with some of the Australian firms potentially. Okay, just a little bit more on the just in relation to that renewable transition. You can see there's a few examples of what is underway and some of the dollars that are being spent there. Just noting that Newcastle Port Logistics Precinct, just the movements required to enable the growth in these energy zones is considerable and actually driving a lot of this early investment. And that's both actually at the ports and also then the road upgrades as well. And then there'll be there's more on the private investment side as those renewable energy zones do grow out over time. I mean, just a few opportunities just raised in terms of the supply chain needs that may be of interest in terms of that transmission equipment, the battery storage systems, oversize over mass, and I guess just raising that it's specialist construction works that may be applicable there. In the data center space, there's as we know, I think that there's a huge opportunity in the market in terms of data center investment. Australia is very much on that journey. Even just very recently, in the last few days, there's been some huge partnerships announced between some of the global giants and some of the Australian data center firms. And I guess there's a bit of a linkage here in terms of some of the locations of those renewable energy zones that can be an ideal location for the more energy intensive facilities in those regional areas, and also that Western Sydney and Aerotropolis space is attracting a significant interest as well. I guess the part that's sort of I just wanted to highlight, I suppose, is just that key consideration around that investment in New South Wales is private sector led. So I would suggest that targeting partnerships with either those operators, developers, or some of the major contractors is the best path to understand and join in that journey of the data centers. Jumping across to water infrastructure, so I mentioned that trebling of investment over the next 5 years. It really is a huge investment going on with these regulated entities. You can see listed out there are just a few of the, I guess, larger and smaller opportunities. There's a lot more to come as a result of those sort of recent regulatory determinations that have been handed down. And just, I guess, highlighting the drivers there. Regional water security is a real priority. Also that I mentioned earlier around some of the asset renewal side of things is a real driver, as well as the just the supply side based around that the scale of growth. And I do understand that the Austrian water technology has quite a strong reputation, so I'm not sure, but potentially some opportunities there. Jumping across to schools, just over the next through this budget cycle, there's around $11 billion investment in education and skills. Again, so I'd mentioned this, few details there around the scale of that in terms of the numbers of schools and so on. Some of those have started, some of them are in the planning phase. Again, some new builds, some major upgrades. I did want to note there just around the modular and prefabricated side of things. Look, there's I guess there's a strong appetite, I guess, for alternative approaches here. I think that Australia is probably maybe still on the maturity journey in that space compared with some of the European countries, and I'm not exactly sure where Austria sits in that regard, but I think that it's an area of interest, that prefabrication side of things, and the productivity benefits that can bring. I'd also mention just the sustainable building materials as a strong focus. That's sort of been mandated even more strongly in a lot of policies over the last couple of years, and I think just look like entrance into sort of this space. I think similarly. Partnerships I would expect to be a strong opportunity with existing relationships being very valuable with the organisations like Infrastructure New South Wales that drives this investment. In terms of the health space, again, big dollars, $12 billion in hospitals and health facilities over the next couple of years. Health Infrastructure New South Wales is the dedicated agency that manages those. As you'd know, I think they're complex builds with long life cycles, and it can be really technically demanding, that construction side of things. So look, quality and compliance focus is very, very strong. I'd also just mention Austrian companies with sort of, if it's medical facility experience or specialist systems, I think potentially targeting some of the sort of either the tier 1, tier 2 sort of contractors as partners could be a potential focus area, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So just engaging in New South Wales infrastructure projects, just a few suggestions, I guess, in pathways here. And I guess, it's being clear around the how these projects come to market. Again, so I'd mentioned the sort of Buy New South Wales site where this sort of this pipeline is published, but I think process is pretty standard around there are those open market calls for an expression of interest. But I would, if you are looking at some of these areas, the panel arrangements are pretty important. So whether it's actually to be trying to seek to be on some of those panels or partnering with those that already are. Then the subcontracting side, as mentioned, whether there's opportunities with those major contractors. And I think part of that partnering, I think there is often sometimes it depends on the scale of the types of projects, but there's a need in the procurement to actually partner with an Australian entity, which can be beneficial as a market entry point. So just highlighting the sectors and the agencies that drive that infrastructure. That I think I've mentioned most of those, but a bit of a summary there for you. But look, all procurement in New South Wales with government it's incredibly transparent. It is very process driven. It can take some time, but really preparation is essential. Really, I'd say well before anything's coming to market, to be preparing and understanding and having those discussions with those organisations is paramount. And the pre-qualification panels, as mentioned, really can be quite critical. Look, Yeah, a few examples here around the right partners, just flagging those tier 1, tier 2 contractors in Australia, and then yes, there's specialist subcontractors as well. There are some organisations that might help in that connection, and Syed mentioned some government bodies that do assist. Australian Contractors Association, Infrastructure Partnerships Australia. There are a couple of avenues, Austrade as well, and then there are those procurement panels. Okay, so just a couple of practical considerations I wanted to mention in Australia. Just like, look, I guess I can't stress strongly enough the importance of those as well as those panels. It's also just actually understanding the businesses, the relationships that are formed, the trust that is required to be brought into these projects, and just so that's that preparation, starting early, engagement from an early stage. Also, just the business culture side, contracts really are taken seriously. I think it's what you would expect, but it's they are like early days getting the right Australian legal advice. I would recommend. Understanding the Foreign Investment Review Board approvals that are required for some sort of investments, and as I mentioned, a number of areas to gain some support. Notwithstanding the Australian Trade Commission, very valuable. Just a summary of my group, I guess, the Project and Infrastructure Advisory in BDO, who broadly who we are, the sectors we focus on. Look, those that I've just discussed. Yes, we do cover those very much. So transport, I haven't gone into, because so I'd mentioned that somewhat, but that's a very big part of our work as well. We do work on both sides of the government side and on the private sector, but probably that has a greater bias towards the government. We have strong relationships with most of these New South Wales government agencies that we just discussed, and the services you can see there, whether it's the early stage transaction advisory, procurement, commercial, asset management, also business case economics and the like. They're the types of services that we do offer on these types of projects. So look, that's a summary of those particular sectors, and a little bit more around what we do. But back to you, Matthias. Thanks very much. I think, Matthias, you're still muted, I think. Come on.
Yeah, I was muted. Thank you, James, for your great presentation, and I will now open the floor to the audience to ask your questions. I would take the first question, actually. I think we learned during Said's presentation that there was a drop in transport investment, which is basically, I guess, because it comes to, it's the cycle that usually happens. There are still investments in the transport section currently with the metro lines, for example. Said, Infrastructure New South Wales publishes its state infrastructure strategy every 4 years. And just for the audience, this is kind of an independent advice on the current state of infrastructure. How would you advise on the high-speed rail with the current discussion around it?
Yeah, thanks, Matthias. I probably should clarify, transport investment hasn't dropped. It's dropped as the share of the total.
Yeah.
So it's still very large. It's just that it's dropped as a share of the total. In terms of the state infrastructure strategy, we're actually preparing one at the moment for hopefully publication by the end of the year, which kind of looks 20 years ahead. High-speed rail is an interesting one because it is being delivered by the federal government, because it's obviously, the idea is obviously it crosses state borders. Previously, the state government was more involved in the development of the planning for the high-speed rail, but it's decided not to kind of leave it in the hands of the federal government to develop, because it's a pretty humongous investment. Is the short way to put it, and it's definitely not in the state priority to allocate as much funding for it as it needs. So I think James, you might know the numbers as well, but I think the last number of federal government for the Sydney to Newcastle route, which is not very long, is like $90 billion or
that's the number.
Something like that. Yeah. So we're very much engaged in our interest with the high-speed rail is obviously wherever the federal government decides the routes to be, they will need to go through the state planning system in simple terms to actually enable the development of the high-speed rail. And that also includes any kind of investments surrounding the stations. Then they will need to align state plans with kind of railhead as to getting the infrastructure or connecting light rail buses and other assets to get people to use the high-speed rail. I did spend a large chunk of my life on high-speed 2 in the UK before I came to Australia, so I was scarred by that. And when they start talking about high-speed rail here, I nearly left the country. So it's these things take a long time, but it's definitely the federal government or the Australian government has progressed into the market process. Next week is the federal government, Australian government's budget. And this is when we'll know more around how much are they actually allocating money towards the next phase of development.
Yep. Thank you very much. James, maybe also a question for you regarding the high-speed rail. Given that traffic infrastructure investments in Australia are usually profit-driven, private sector, let's say, and the huge amount that you mentioned, $90 billion investment just for that section of Newcastle to Sydney, given that the population that lives in that area in Newcastle, what would make it financially feasible, or does it even add it up, or what's your thoughts around that?
That's a really interesting question, Matthias. And look, $90 billion is a huge number. And yes, you point out like the population that we are talking about with Newcastle. So do you know what the population is in Newcastle roughly now?
It's 250,000.
250,000 or so, yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, there's huge objectives through this project to increase the size of Newcastle with this connection that would then drive demand to a higher level. And just the other angle, and what's one of the drivers for that huge number in terms of the construction cost, is that I think it's a large proportion of the route is actually through tunnels, just due to the topography on the east coast of Australia. But getting to your specific question around I guess the financial feasibility here, it is going to be the return on this financially it is going to be very little. The business case itself wasn't. The details the details of the numbers within the business case weren't released publicly, but look, we know just broadly from the scale of that investment and the numbers we're talking about, it's not it's going to be a government investment and to drive that housing growth, and the actual financial feasibility of itself is not published, but I think it's going to be very, very difficult for it would be by itself. It's not going to be able to stack up without that government support.
I think it's important, Matthias, to remember in Australia, whilst we have been successful at financially through toll roads and things, on kind of selling road assets. So we obviously motorways, the state established Sydney Motorway Corporation and sold a large share of it and used the money to fund a lot of other assets. But because toll roads make money, rail in Australia does not make money, so it doesn't pay its capital cost, and its operational costs are also heavily subsidized. So it does not make money. I think it would not be unlike many other countries either that don't make money out of rail. It's a difficult one to make money out of.
Yeah,
but
I think
but a very important asset. You know, it's not about money. It's a very important asset for the country.
Yeah, okay. I think even the rail network in Sydney only covers around 20% of its operational costs, something like that. It's and I don't, as you say, I don't think that's too uncommon around the world.
Okay.
I think it's Hong Kong and Singapore are rare examples,
exceptions.
But
yeah, they have the population, I guess. Thank you very much. We have a question in the Q&A section from Wolfram Schuler. The question is there any governmental platform where we can hand in and present sustainable solutions and work together on how to potentially introduce and push such solutions to the local industry?
So if I start, I mean, I think there isn't a specific government platform. I think the way you would start doing this, I would definitely encourage whoever is coming, the trade delegation, to actually organize time, and we're happy to support, organize time to bring the relevant government agency, depends on which kind of sector, etc., that the solutions are in. So I think I'd start by just simply, government's always very happy to talk to international delegations and talk about the solutions they bring. There's a slide that James had, which had kind of contractors, and if you look at the list of our contractors in New South Wales, you've got most of the large global contractors operate here, either through having acquired Australian companies or actually set up their own kind of firms. But acquiring has been traditionally a very common way to do it, because they get the licensing straight away, obviously, from the entity they acquired. So it's an environment that's very used to international players coming in and doing stuff. So I think having discussions, presenting the solutions, and testing how they align with local requirements and the things that are happening already in the market would be my first point, rather than having to worry about government platforms to access that.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I can unmute Wolfram for your second question, and you can explain a bit in what context it is, maybe what products. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, Wolfram, can you, I hope it worked. Okay, Wolfram, if you unmute yourself, I think then it should work.
I think, can you hear me?
Yes, we can
hear
you.
Oh, okay, yes. Thank you very much. So I'm working for the Liebherr company. So we are providing cranes and lifting solutions, as well as special deep foundation solutions for the local infrastructure and construction industry. And there we are also already in contact with the big tier 1 contractors. So for example, Ashana is one of our customers. John Hollands, we are working very close together with John Hollands since some years already. And we are experiencing a lot of challenges, especially when we try to introduce sustainable or decarbonization, so equipment which can help in decarbonization. We provide, for example, we have since some years in our portfolio battery-driven crawler cranes. There is already some of them in the country. So 3 in total crawler cranes and 1 drill rig is operating in Australia, but there is still a very high hurdle, actually, because the customers, the construction companies, they are not, it's very hard for them to find motivation, say it like that, to invest into this gear, because most of the time it's more expensive, obviously. And yeah, they are actually wanted to ask if there is any motivation which can be provided by the government, may it be in subsidies, may it be in beneficial financing solutions or similar things.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
Sorry, you go, James.
No, I was going to ask you. Yeah, it's great if you could respond to this one if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So there's no direct support. I think the way it will come about is so we are starting the decarbonization journey of the delivery. So the way that it will come will be requirements from or the incentive, if you like, as you called it, will be through how government will procure projects, expecting the market to deliver sustainable solutions. So whether it's so I don't know, we have contractors who are using renewable diesel in a crane, as an example. There are all kinds of things that are coming up, but the challenge you're pointing out is very real, which is obviously there was no specific government policy or government incentive for those contractors to invest in sustainable solutions, because the drivers have been cost and quality and proposal for how you deliver, but not so much around sustainability. But that's changing. But sustainability has been very predominantly focused on the operating assets rather than on the delivery of assets. But what you talked about was predominantly the delivery of assets through cranes or whatever other gear. So I think that will be changing over the coming years. It won't happen magically and suddenly everybody will be demanding them, because I think we are in a heavily challenged market at the moment. We have we're coming out of COVID, very high construction costs. Projects have had very high kind of cost blowouts in some cases, and the industry is quite stressed. So I think once that settles, and we've just been hit with the fuel crisis, so it's not a very good time, like, to be blunt. And I think, but we are moving there. So we're moving to demanding more sustainable solutions, both in the actual delivery of construction, the use of materials, and these things. But that will take a bit of time to come together.
Okay, just one thing I wanted to ask was you actually also mentioned that you were involved in the HS2 project in the UK.
Yes.
And there
10 years ago, I should say.
10 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
10 years ago we weren't there with the battery cranes already, but now when they are now in operation, there is customer Select actually is operating there, and the same customer we will also have already our battery solutions operating in Australia, and they said it was a very it was very beneficial actually to them that the energy actually was subsidized by the governments or by the contractors. I'm not 100% sure, as I'm not responsible for UK, but they said that the electricity is actually subsidized. So for sustainable gear, for battery electric driven gear, it actually gives them a huge benefit, especially when you mentioned the oil and gas crisis, which we are facing at the moment.
Yes.
This maybe would encourage the customers to reconsider such solutions.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely on the cards. I think the UK has had a much earlier journey with going through. In fact, our sustainable infrastructure delivery policy or decarbonization policy follows from how the UK kind of prescribed theirs. But they're ahead, so we're probably getting there a bit later than them, and there'll be considerations, because it's just a massive broader push towards electrification everywhere here as well. So I think that will just happen. It's just a matter of time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wolfram. We have one last question in the Q&A section, and maybe I unmute Christian as well. Okay, Christian, if you unmute yourself now, it should work, and then you can explain your question in the context you're operating in. Okay, let's try again. So, Christian, if you unmute yourself now, then you should be able to raise your question directly. If not, then I can just read the question. So it's, how's the current situation regarding the water supply in Australia? I think Christian's company is active in smart metering and therefore interested in what upgrades are happening and also in like, for example, with Sydney Water, that they announced they will invest $3 billion. Yeah, if you can, maybe James, that's for you a question.
Look, I can start this one maybe, and then Sodhi can jump in. I was thinking it was water supply, the broader supply challenge on the risk of droughts in Australia. But I think if he's not focused on that, it's more in the sort of the upgrading of the local or regional assets and pipelines. Look, the overall, there are some areas around sort of the, I guess, Greater Sydney that require significant upgrades to enable the growth that's occurred in housing and that which is going forward. And so yeah, those are quite sort of, I guess, quite involved projects where it's upgrading that existing infrastructure, and yes, and some new pipelines being installed in those locations. Yeah, I mean, there is also, yes, there's consideration of another desalination plant for that overall supply side. But yeah, so do you have more insight into sort of the specifics on those projects?
I mean, the best way to put it is there's a lot of upgrades in the wastewater system. So Sydney, I can't speak for the whole of Australia, but Sydney specifically, I'll speak a bit Sydney and regional New South Wales, quite different stories. But in Sydney, traditionally, 80% of our water comes from the Warragamba Dam, from rainfall-dependent supply. It goes into a reservoir called Prospect Water, and then the wastewater filters through ocean outfall systems into the ocean. Pretty simple, but their legacy assets, it's now a big city, and there's a lot of investment in advanced water recycling plants. So that's something that Sydney Water is doing a lot of to support that growth, rather than to continue just relying on that kind of system of ocean outfall supply, or ocean outfall dependent for the wastewater system, and the Warragamba Dam for water supply. So the forthcoming investments probably heavily at the moment in the wastewater system, but really the longer term, I think, policy decisions will be around more rainfall independent water supply. So expanding, we have 15% of the supply can come through the desalination plant at the moment. There are plans potentially to double the capacity there, but they have not been approved or gone ahead yet. But it will be a combination of at some point in the future more desalination and more kind of potable recycled water potentially, if the policy decision is made. But no, such decision has been made yet. In the regions, it's a bit different because there's a broader kind of federally managed scheme in the Murray-Darling Basin, which is how it allocates water in the region. And then there is a lot of local water utilities, predominantly owned by the councils in the regions, that are really have been historically challenged because of the financial capacity, and the actual delivery capacity in the regions to kind of maintain and keep these going. And the state has funded a lot of the upgrades and a lot of the delivery of these to continue to operate these assets. So I think they're kind of two different challenges in the regions versus what happens in the metropolitan areas. But fundamentally, if I think ahead, what are the kind of key things that the policymakers will have to make decisions about is the desalination and the potable recycled water going forward. And even if it's not potable, but just to manage the wastewater system, is the recycling of water to a degree that you can actually discharge, say, in the river systems or in inland areas where you're not obviously discharging very dirty water. So most of the investments, when they are wastewater, are happening at that advanced water recycling system. So that's kind of a big snapshot. But as James said, we're like obviously at the moment we've had rain, so our dams and etc. are pretty full. But when we get a drought, pretty quickly, and we can switch into drought mode, and then we have a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. I know we are 2 or 3 minutes over the time, but we have just one last question. What are the tunneling projects that come up in New South Wales for roads or rail, for example? Are there any planned or discussed at the moment? I mean, there's the Western Harbour Tunnel that's currently under construction, but what's planned for the future?
Yeah, I mean, James, you can start and I'll follow.
Well, I mean, the biggest one would be if High Speed Rail did get up, that would be a phenomenally large tunneling project in the rail space. Look, there are a number of other major road projects. Specifically, which ones are tunneling? I'm going to see if Syed knows a little bit more detail on those ones.
So currently, there's not one obvious one until budgets are decided, and probably next year will be the time, because we have an election coming up for next year for the state government. But the Metro West tunneling, but that's already in progress. Obviously, that's probably the biggest one. So there aren't any specific ones, and I know Australian companies are very good tunneling companies, but we also have a motorway called the M6 Stage 2, which is currently in a massive dispute because the engineering solution was not very good, and the tunnel folded, and the ground conditions were not favorable. So tunneling is not a very popular topic at the moment, but that one is a major dispute that is obviously playing out in the media as well. But there was a massive sinkhole, and obviously the engineering design solution was not, which was a risk that the contractor had taken on. Was not a good outcome. But I think at the moment most of the tunneling projects are in delivery, and it's about what are the next phase of projects that the government wants to commit to, which they haven't announced yet. Okay.
Yep. James, do you have anything to add on that?
I think that's a good summary from Syed. The only thing I'll mention is that there's a big hydroelectric scheme as well called Snowy Hydro, which is having similar or has that even more significant tunneling challenges, which again are playing out in the media.
Yeah, okay. I think we talked about this priority webinar around toll roads. Just one last question for the audience, maybe. Toll roads, is there anything currently planned to build a new toll road, or at the moment, same with the tunneling, depending on the budgets in the next years?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. There are no plans for the toll roads because this current government here in New South Wales was not happy with the degree of tolling that was in New South Wales roads. So, and the kind of impact that has had, there's been a great focus on the cost of living, and the impact that has had the tolling of roads that has had on I guess, unequal impact to different parts of the city. So probably you won't have the same kind of degree of road tolling or tolled roads being procured in the near future to the extent that was happening over the past kind of 15 years or so.
Okay. Okay, I think at this point there are no further questions in the Q&A sections. James and Said, thank you very much for your insights. That was very helpful for us. Before I let everyone go, I would just like to mention that if you're interested in a sort of deep dive session about these different industries that we talked about, is it water infrastructure, railroad, or data centers and energy, we are happy to organize such deep dive sessions with, again, some local experts to really focus on that specific sector. And also, obviously, our infrastructure delegation happening at the end of November is also a chance for you to individually talk with us about the agenda. Last but not least, the European Union and Australia have agreed on a free trade agreement. And next week on Tuesday, our office is organizing a webinar to inform about what's the process from now on, how is the free trade agreement being implemented in the next 1 or 2 years, what is included in the free trade agreement, tariffs, certification processes, and things like that. So feel free to join us for that webinar as well next week, Tuesday. I think it's again around 4:30 p.m. Australia time, which is 8:30 a.m. Austria time. We'll send out links again. You can find the links on our websites as well. Yeah, just to mention that. And with that, I would like to conclude this webinar. Thank you very much again, Said and James, for your contributions. Thank you to the audience for joining us. And yeah, have a great evening. Have a great day.